if I bleed tonight, if I am sad tonight, I don't have a job to find. And if I work tonight, I'm so tired tonight, I'll fall asleep when I'm home.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode number 6 of the Power Slam podcast here on Inside the Ropes, exclusively on our YouTube channel. I'm Kenny McIntosh, joined as always by the former Hulk Hogan of professional wrestling media in the UK. I mean that in terms of how big a name he was, not by having a sex tape or anything. Finn Martin. Hi Finn.
Thanks for that introduction, Kenny. I've never been compared to Hulk Hogan before, and I'm glad that you clarified on the end there why there's no connection between me and Hulk in that regard. There's definitely not a tape of me out there, so don't go looking for it.
Yeah, don't be Googling it, folks. It's not there. Don't be asking for it. The thing I want to ask you about, first of all, just to get it out of the way, because, well, to bring it up, because it's so ludicrous. Obviously, there's been a long-standing rivalry with Jim Cornette and Vince Russo for years and years and years. Cornette thinks that Russo, drove wrestling into the ground. Russo thinks Cornette's stuck behind the times. They've tried at points to get on. Cornette now wants him dead. All these different things. But it all escalated about a month ago when Vince Russo had said on one of his podcasts, I don't listen to them because I think I would commit suicide if I had to listen to him on a regular basis. But he had mentioned that he come and debate me face to face, Jim Cornette. And then Jim Cornette responded. Did you hear the offer that Jim Cornette had for Vince Russo?
Now, I have seen something about this, but I've got to say that this feud has been going on for so long. And I've interviewed Jim Cornette a few times over the years, and we've talked about Vince Russo at length. And I have to say that I did not look into this particular situation. I find it hard to believe that this is still ongoing. But anyway, I cut you off there, Kenny. Please continue.
Well,
what was said?
This is Jim Cornette's offer to Vince Russo, and I want to get your hot take on what you think of this offer. So Jim Cornette said, "Look, I don't want to debate him. I hate him. I want him dead. Blah 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 blah." He said, "But if he really wants to meet me, then the deal is give me a time, a place, and a location. I will come with $5,000. If you can get it from me, you get it. And the only rules are no cops, no guns, no knives."
I think I did hear something about this, yes. I mean, it's
very rare that you have a brief silence after I've said something. Almost like, come on,
Well, I think
before you answer that, sorry, just to give the new information out there, so that we're on top of it here and we're current. So that all happened, and obviously Vince Russo then did like a swerve apology where he apologized to Jim Cornette, but it was all kind of like, I'm sorry that I'm not behind the times, I'm sorry I'm not a mark, and all this sort of stuff. But yesterday, Jim Cornette was visited at his home in Louisville, Kentucky by the police because Vince Russo has filed an emergency restraining order against Jim Cornette because he fears for his safety. Finn, you've probably known about this story and covered it for a lot longer than anybody else has. What is your take on we're in 2017 and Vince Russo is filing a restraining order against Jim Cornette?
Well, I remember a few years ago, Cornette put something on his website mentioning that he'd received a letter from TNA, as it was then, their legal department, after he had basically told, I think it was somebody in the office, I'm going to mention the guy's name, but Cornette had expressed his hatred for Russo to this person who worked in the TNA office, and then this person in the TNA office who Cornette thought he could confide in, instead he relayed this information to people in TNA, and then Cornette got a letter from TNA lawyers all about, it was a similar type of thing, and it was all linked to Vince Russo, who at this point was still working for TNA. So we've been here before in a sense. Cornette wrote about this on his website. I mean, this must be going back to maybe 2011 or 2010. I'm not sure which. I mean, I know Cornette was fired in September of 2009. So it was probably 2010 when this went down. It was a big story at the time. You'll be able to look it up. So it's not that surprising in a sense. It does scream attention seeking by Vince Russo to me. I mean, you know, it's hard for me to believe that Russo is really afraid of Cornette in this regard. I mean, it was just a challenge that was issued. I think it was just a comedy challenge. I think it was, I mean, how can anyone take this seriously at this point? I mean, I can't.
But also, it's like, the thing that's funny to me is that Vince Russo brought this all on himself.
Yeah.
And he's the one that's publicly saying, yo, come on, Jim Cornette, come and debate. And listen, like, I've said this a couple of times. I've spent enough time with Jim Cornette in person, with no cameras around. This is not a gimmick that he hates the guy. Like, it's really not. He genuinely despises him. And, like, if I knew somebody hated me that much and was as much of a mentalist as Jim Cornette, and I say that with love, I wouldn't want to poke that bear at all. I'd just leave him alone. Stay away.
Yeah.
But maybe that's... Maybe that should be the next Inside the Ropes live tour: Jim Cornette versus Vince Russo.
Maybe, yeah. But I mean, what wasn't the setup here that they were going to designate a place where they were going to meet voluntarily to have this confrontation? So it's not like, from what I understand, Cornette isn't threatening to go to his house and do something. It's, you know, a prearranged thing that they were going to finally settle this thing. So I'm not sure how we get from that to the police visiting Cornette at home to inform him that he's been served with a restraining order. I'm not quite sure how we get from point A to point D without going through B and C. So, but anyway, it kind of reminds me a bit of some of Vince Russo's writing stroke booking. Doesn't make any sense at all. So I find the whole thing ludicrous, to be honest with you, Kenny. It just seems like, you know, there are other things that these people really should be talking about at this point, you know, in June 2017. I mean, Russo doesn't really have much involvement in pro wrestling anymore, from what I can work out. I mean, he's not involved in any company.
You can email him and offer and get his creative consultation services.
Okay, well, I mean, how many people are doing that? You know, so I mean, to me, he's a guy that's, I mean, he had his run. I mean, he's a guy I've written about him at length over the years. You know, in all three of my books, in Power Slam, for really from, I guess, when he really became a factor, which would have been, I guess, about 97 when we first sort of knew who he was. I mean, I knew who he was prior to that because he ran WWF magazine, and he had like a persona, Vic Venom there, and, you know, he made that magazine quite a success from what I understand. Raw magazine was his project. That was a huge success as well, as WWF really rose and became, you know, far more popular. I think Vince Russo had a lot to do with that. And, you know, I've definitely given him the credit he deserves for his role in the WWF's growth and rise to prominence and the number one promotion in the world in 98, 99. But I mean, everybody knows what Russo's done since he left WWF in October of 99 and went to WCW. We don't really need to go over that again. There have been few highlights, Kenny. Few highlights, in my opinion. And to me, he just seems like a guy that's not really relevant anymore. And it's hard for me to believe that he'll ever have a large role in pro wrestling again. But there again, you know, that's been written and said before, and, you know, maybe he will make a big comeback, and maybe he will end up in Impact Wrestling again. I mean...
Oh, God, can you imagine? Oh.
I mean, he was written off so many times throughout the 2000s and kept making these comebacks before he finally left. I think he finally left TNA in 2012.
Isn't the sign that, like, if the company have to, like, kayfabe the fact that you're working for them, you know, because the network wasn't it like Spike didn't want him to be working on the show, so
yes.
Dixie like had him working on it in secret, and then he sent that email to Mike Johnson rather than Mike Tenay.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
You just can't.
It's
you just cannot make it up.
Wrestling.
I mean, that just tells you, you know, just the name is just, in many ways, it's just toxic. You know, but he was with TNA on and off for like nearly 10 years. So, I mean, he was a guy that he just kept making comebacks. It was just amazing, really. So, maybe there'll be another. I mean, probably not, because Dixie doesn't appear to have much power anymore in TNA, or Impact Wrestling as it now is. So it's hard for me to believe that he will return, but, you know, you can never say never in this industry, and certainly when it comes to Vince Russo.
But let's talk about the big topic in everyone's mind. I've covered it with Sondra, so, you know, a couple of times, but we've not heard what you've thought. Money in the Bank on Sunday. Let's focus on the women's Money in the Bank storyline. They have the match that opens the show. In the end, James Ellsworth knocks Becky off the ladder. He goes up, grabs the briefcase, throws it down to Carmella. She catches it. She wins, becomes the first Miss Money in the Bank. She teases cashing in later on. Forward to Tuesday on SmackDown, and she cuts what I thought was a very good heel promo on the situation before later on Daniel Bryan stripped her of the briefcase and has made a rematch for next week for the Money in the Bank briefcase. So there's a lot of people on both sides that feel very strongly about it. Some people thought it really devalued what they were trying to do with the women's Money in the Bank match and the historical part of it. Some people think it was a sexist thing. Some people liked the storyline and thought it was a clever sort of story. Where do you lie, and what do you think about the whole situation?
On the night when it happened, I felt that it was as if something had gone wrong, and it was like, wow, you know, what's just happened? Is Shane McMahon going to come out in a moment and restart the match? The referees were debating it furiously at ringside. So it's obviously a very controversial finish. We'd never seen anything like that before. We'd seen interference before, but we'd never seen somebody actually grab the case and then hand it to the person who was the actual somebody. We'd never seen somebody who was not a participant in the match unhook the case and then hand it to the participant in the match, who then became the winner. We've never seen that before, that level of interference. I mean, I felt like the match, it was like 3/4 of a match. I felt like the match should have been restarted. This is what I felt on the night. I felt like the match should have been restarted, and there should have been a decisive outcome. I mean, Shane McMahon was the guy. He's like the, you know, fan-friendly, fair-minded Shane. He does the right thing. I was like, where is he? Why isn't he coming out? And he lodged his objection on Twitter. So, I mean, apparently he wasn't even at the show. I mean, we didn't see him. He wasn't on SmackDown this Tuesday either. So, I mean, you've got to wonder where, you know, Shane's priorities lie if he's not at SmackDown for a pay-per-view. I mean, does that mean that the pay-per-view doesn't really matter, that he wasn't there for it, or on SmackDown 2 nights later? I know Daniel Bryan was there this week. But on the night, I just felt like I felt like the fans were shortchanged. The reaction in the arena was one of, I think, surprise and disbelief. I think most people felt that there would have been, something would have happened to correct this. I think that was the reaction on the night. And instead we waited 2 nights to SmackDown, where Daniel Bryan announced that there would be a Money in the Bank ladder match rematch on next week's SmackDown. And next week's SmackDown kind of feels a bit like a Money in the Bank rerun, because we've also got a rematch between Naomi and Lana. So it kind of feels like Money in the Bank need not have happened, because we're going to be seeing it again next week on TV. On the night, I just felt felt like they shortchanged the fans. And I felt like they really shortchanged Carmella as well. You, I think, predicted in our last podcast that she would win, which of course she did, but it was not a decisive win. It was such a cheap win. It was an undeserved win. And it was kind of funny, really, because I think my prediction was for Becky Lynch, who was sort of framed as the deserving winner. She would have won had Ellsworth not interfered, had Ellsworth not tipped her off the ladder. So I thought that was quite funny, really, that, I predicted Becky and you predicted Carmella. Mm-hmm. And then on SmackDown 2 nights later, she cut a strange promo, and it was quite an emotional promo for her. I felt like her voice was nearly going there a couple of times. And she was complaining that people had underestimated her. But then she said that she was not about girl power. And if her motivation was to really let people know that they shouldn't underestimate her, then she really should have scored a decisive victory. And then we would have all been looking at her and saying, wow, we should have given this woman more credit. We should have believed in her. And instead, we've got this outcome that is so indecisive that we're having a rematch on next week's SmackDown. So it was as if it was created to manufacture controversy. Well, of course it was. It was just created to spin out the storyline. I really felt like the first women's Money in the Bank match should have given us a decisive victor. I felt that the fans deserved that, and I felt that the winner of the match deserved that as well. Maybe that's what we'll get next week on SmackDown, and we've just got to wait 9 days for it.
Well, we're going to find out next week what's going to happen when we get the Money in the Bank rematch. What did you think of the Money in the Bank show overall?
I wrote about this in depth in my latest blog on finleymartin.co.uk, so you can read all about it there. I thought there was some good action with some really poor finishes, some dreadful finishes. After the opening Money in the Bank match with the women's Money in the Bank match with that bizarre finish, we then had the tag team match between the Usos and Big E and Kofi Kingston of the New Day. And that was a really good match. Terrific false finishes, really well built. Fans were with it. They provided the atmosphere. And then we had the walkout, count out finish. It was like, come on. That was like 2 rotten finishes in a row. I felt Lana did well in the match, but she was out there too long. That was my opinion. I thought she did better than expected, but the match should have been shorter. Jinder Mahal versus Randy Orton. Again, the action was good. Didn't like the finish. As I say, you can read all about that in my blog. The main event was a really good match. Didn't like the finish there either. So, you predicted, maybe people will be thinking it's sour grapes because my prediction didn't come true. You predicted Baron Corbin. I predicted AJ Styles. So, Corbin won. To me, it almost felt like the show was booked for Vince McMahon's entertainment or amusement and really no one else's. And the whole thing with Corbin losing to Sami Zayn, was it 3 times in the space of like a month on TV or pay-per-view, and then winning the Money in the Bank briefcase? It just felt, hang on a minute, why has this guy lost all these matches and now we're suddenly supposed to accept him as the next potential world champion? And it's sort of ass backwards booking where we're not building people up. We're sort of knocking them down. So then in one fell swoop with one, drastic booking move, we're gonna say, yes, this is the guy now. This is the person you need to believe in, even though we've just been telling you on TV for weeks that he's somebody that you shouldn't believe in. So I found the whole show curious. I found it just to me didn't really feel like a show that was designed to achieve anything on the night. It was more a show that just it just felt like an episode of SmackDown. It didn't feel like a show that really settled anything. It was just a continuation of where we were. That's my opinion of it. It was, if you didn't see it, you didn't really miss much. And that was really emphasized by what happened on SmackDown on Tuesday when they announced 2 rematches on next week's SmackDown. So what did you think of it, Kenny?
I thought the show was good. I've kind of gone on record saying I liked Carmella winning the briefcase the way she did. I said it, yesterday on the SmackDown show that I think people were talking about the match and Carmella a lot more than they would have if she had just won it with no sort of like controversy. But it's all to do with the story, It's all to do with how it plays out, and I'm optimistic that it's going to play out well. I enjoyed the sort of through the night storyline on Tuesday, so I was happy with that. I thought the main event was great. I'm not thrilled about Baron Corbin being Mr. Money in the Bank. Like, I understand it, and Money in the Bank is more of a heel thing to have, but it's Baron Corbin. It's somebody who he's still learning. He's like a trainee teacher. He's not quite been equipped for like everything, but he can do the basics. So I really liked the debut of Maria and Mike Kanellis. They were sickeningly in love, which I thought was fun. I'm curious as to whether the way they were positioned makes Maria more of the kind of Sable to his Mark Merrow.
Yeah.
I hope not, because he is really good, but it'll, it's one of those things. I think if you go into WWE, if they have a gimmick for you, like if Vince wants you to do a gimmick, it's better just to do it and go with it than argue.
Yeah,
so,
I agree.
So I think he's doing the right thing, and I hope that he can. I think of all the shows to be on, SmackDown is the one that will give him the best chance of being able to grow. So I thought that the show was decent, and I think that. What's interesting sometimes is how people view a pay-per-view, because now it's like, if you pay $9.99, you get 2 pay-per-views a month, you get weekly NXT, you get all this sort of stuff. So in terms of value, I feel that you can get away with doing the odd pay-per-view that purely is building towards TV. But that's okay to me, because I think it's something that people have been saying the last couple of months is that they enjoy the pay-per-views, but they don't really feel the need to watch week to week. So having a Money in the Bank match on the show, and I think you were telling me before we went on air that SmackDown is up to over 3 million viewers.
No, that was Raw.
Or was it Raw?
That was Raw.
What's SmackDown up to? 2.5?
SmackDown was well up as well. I mean, the June 13 SmackDown, that did it was that was way much. Sorry, let me just start again. The June 13 SmackDown, that pulled 2.072 million viewers, which was its lowest audience of 2017. This week's SmackDown, June 20th, that was up to 2.597 million viewers. So a huge increase there, which tells us that people really were interested in seeing how they would react to the controversy at Money in the Bank. So as a 1 week ratings device to increase ratings, it was a success. It did work. So in those terms, you can't really fault it. But I was just really looking at it as a self-contained show, which it's difficult, isn't it? Do you look at a pay-per-view as a self-contained show and review it for what it actually delivered on the night? Or do you just say, well, that's just a little part of the story, and let's just review it in 2 days or 9 days or 16 days time? And it depends on which way you look at it. And maybe we should really be looking at it for the long term. The feature I wrote on my blog was really based on a self-contained review of that show.
Yeah.
A week from next Tuesday, maybe Carmella enters a really dominant performance and comes out of the show enhanced as somebody that really deserves the Money in the Bank briefcase. But if that is the outcome, why didn't she just do that in the first place?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that when it comes to the Royal Rumble, WrestleMania, or SummerSlam, I think, and just for me, I expect something more definitive.
Yeah.
For the other pay-per-views, I'm not as bothered. But I mean, this has been going on for years. If you look back, even the Attitude Era, like Judgment Day '98, you've got the vacant WWF Championship on the line, and at the end of the show, there's no finish. Because Steve Austin's the referee, and he just does the double count for Undertaker and Kane, and that's it. And see, So I mean, at that point, you were paying what? What would they have been paying in America at that point? I'm putting you on the spot here. Maybe
would it be about $30 maybe? I think it would have been 30.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're paying $30,
Yeah.
and you're getting the main event for the vacant WWF Championship, and there's no winner, I think that's far more frustrating than now the model having changed and playing with that model to, because I guess one of the plus points is that now, you were saying that this week's SmackDown did what again? 2.5
Yeah, 2.5, nearly 2.6 million viewers.
Okay. So I mean, there's 1.8 million network subscribers. I would guess that Money in the Bank, it's probably about 800,000 people watched that show, something like that. I wouldn't say it was the entire, people that have subscribed to it or anywhere near it, but say it's 1 million, just to be generous. But now this rematch is going to be seen by probably 2.5 million people. So you're opening up to a bigger audience, but now the pressure's on to deliver, because people like me who've been defending the storyline want a good outcome, and then people who didn't like the storyline want some sort of what's the word?
Like maybe resolution or something.
Yeah, like a resolution. Like they felt cheated, so they wanna they want to see that change. We had a couple of fan questions for you, Finn, that I thought I would ask you just off the back of these because it's kind of relevant. Caroline wanted to know. WWE seemed to start with shock event for interest, then try and build story after, rather than build story that has payoff. What are your thoughts on that? Is that how they book, do you think?
Sorry, can you just repeat that question?
Sure. She says WWE seemed to start with shock events for interest and then try and build story after it, rather than build the story that has a payoff straight away. Would you say that's kind of how they book, or would you see it differently?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting that you mentioned Judgment Day 98 just before, and we had that outcome where Steve Austin refused to count either Undertaker or Kane's pin on each other. And then I think he declare himself champion at the end of the match or something.
Did he not stunner them both, and then he just pinned them both? He just slapped the mat down 3 times when both of them were on their back? That's
right, yeah. And Vince McMahon, prior to that, or Mr. McMahon, had said that if you don't do this, Austin, you will be fired. And then McMahon at the end of that show did fire him in the storyline. So that actually did deliver a major shock ending. And that then led to that incredible angle, which you would obviously never do now, where Austin kidnapped him the next night on Raw, which was actually just stunning at the time, shocking. It really was. I mean, did they go too far? I think they probably did do, but they got away with it because they were so popular.
But then is that the kind of, just to kind of cut in, is that, because even with that, they used a pay-per-view to build to the TV. And I almost feel like that's something that so for example, for now, if you watched what was the pay-per-view after WrestleMania for Raw? Payback.
Yeah.
If you watched Payback and then you didn't watch TV until Extreme Rules, I don't really think you missed anything. You could have just gone, okay, here's the matches. Okay, Braun Strowman's not around anymore. Okay, I've got Alexa and Bayley again. I've got and you know the Miz and Ambrose, and you know the main events you're gonna get. Whereas back in '98, if you had watched Judgment Day '98, and then you didn't watch any of WWF until the Survivor Series, you would have not a clue what's going on.
Agreed, yeah. I mean, so much happened. I mean, it was, you had to tune in. But I mean, at that point, WCW was trailing. WCW did draw that huge rating for the Halloween Havoc rematch, wasn't it, that they put on the air between Goldberg and Dallas Page after the pay-per-view went off early. So they did draw a big rating that month, but the war was still going on. So WWF was under tremendous pressure to deliver every week and to give you something that you could not miss, that you had to see. And I remember after McMahon fired Austin, in the storyline at the end of Judgment Day, I received a few emails from people who genuinely believed that Austin had been fired and would have to join WCW. Seriously. But it was a huge storyline at the time, and it's a shocking event. And then that led to that amazing, shocking, astounding, however you want to describe it, kidnap angle. And then, of course, Survivor Series with the tournament for the vacant WWF heavyweight title, which The Rock won when he stunningly, breathtakingly turned heel. So you had all sorts of I mean, we can still remember these storylines now, Kenny, which just tells you how good they were. We're in 2007. We're going back nearly 19 years.
Well, there's actually somebody, I don't know what their name is, their Twitter handles is Thank You Fleury, which is at Christian Borto, had asked about, what would be a quick fix for Raw and SmackDown ratings. And I just kind of wonder, like, off the back of, like, the Money in the Bank discussion we've had and looking at Judgment Day 98, do you think if WWE were to do things where, you kind of have to watch the TV every week and the TV's giving you twists and turns all the time, is that something you think they should start doing again?
Yes, I do. Well, yeah, absolutely. I think they should give us more compelling storylines. They should give us things that we have to watch. And when they do it well, and they're doing it well right now with Samoa Joe and Brock Lesnar, there seems to be a lot of interest in this. And also Braun Strowman returning on Raw this week to set up another match with Roman Reigns. I think we've been given enough of a break from this feud that it's refreshed it, and I think people are ready for that again. They're doing it under ambulance rules, so the match will be slightly different. And they've very intelligently set this up with lots of ambulance-related activity in the past, so it makes sense. So this is part of a long-term storyline that hasn't just come from out of nowhere. So, and it kind of, to me, feels like it will be the end of the feud as well. I don't think they'll have another match after that, or at least not on pay-per-view. So I think that's a match that people will want to see. So definitely in terms of delivering a product that is unmissable, of course that's what they should be doing. I mean, not every segment can be a hit. Not every segment can be, wow, people remember it in 10 years. But I think there should be a few segments on each show which are designed to really linger in the mind's eye afterwards, and to really build anticipation for the next show and the next pay-per-view. So I definitely think that it could be putting a lot more effort into the things they do produce. I mean, the Cass and Enzo storyline, I didn't really feel that much, didn't really feel like there was that much tension attached to it, in my opinion, when we had the big reveal on Raw this week. I think they could have done more to really ratchet up, crank up the tension there and the drama. I mean, it was a logical storyline in a sense, in that they built it up over a period of weeks, and then they actually delivered the thing that we thought was going to happen. So I'm not knocking the storytelling per se, but I really feel they could have really put more emphasis on it, and maybe really had some more backstage segments with Enzo and Cass where they were discussing who it might have been and potential contenders and how close they'd been, and maybe run some videos of them like being pals, dating back for years, and footage of them, being like, best mates and everything. And so that really would have illustrated how awful Cass was by turning on his partner and friend of many years. I think they could have done more to really emphasize why Enzo was so shocked, because he was there with the wide eyes and stunned expression when the penny dropped that it was Cass who had attacked him. I really felt like they could have done more to really build that up. What do you think to that, Kenny?
I think I probably give it more of a pass, because I think that it's so cool to have a storyline again where we're left to wonder, and where there's various options. And what I liked about it is it feels to me like what they've done recently, whether it's the women's Money in the Bank or whether it's the Enzo and Cass thing, they've had an idea for an angle that's going to last a few weeks minimum, and they've followed through with it. Like, so for example, the Enzo and Cass thing, the Revival were specifically placed a couple of times for you to make you think it was them.
Yeah.
The second week, or the week after Enzo was attacked, Corey Graves said he'd love to shake the hand of the person who did it, and that week he shook Cass's hand. On TV. Which was a really subtle thing, but now that Cass has been revealed, you go, that's why Cass shook his hand. Because he was playing with him.
Yeah.
And I think stuff like that's really good when you can reward people for watching by, giving them something that it means that their time has been worthwhile and they're getting some payback for it. I think that's good. So I like...
Yeah, definitely great to have a storyline with a start, a middle, and an end.
And like Caroline was saying, you probably should have like an end point, and then work your way back.
Yeah, I mean, to answer that question, I mean, the shock booking or the shock incident or whatever, I guess that's designed as an attention grabber, and then like, right, let's see where it goes from there. And that was definitely a Vince Russo thing where you're like, right, well, let's do this, and we've got the talent to be able to assess the reaction to it and to give the people roughly what they want, or at least sell them this thing and let them know that even though they don't think it's what they want, we're expert enough to sell it to them so that by the end of it, they say, yes, that's what we wanted all along. So I understand why they would do it the other way around, because the shock grabs your attention and then you see, right, let's see where it goes from there. The drawback to that is if you have the shock and don't really have a plan, and you don't really feel like it's had the desired impact on the public, the temptation is to just sort of drop it and forget about it. And WWE has done that so many times. I mean, last year and earlier this year, I mean, it just became like a broken record. It was just, tedious the amount of times that they would do something and then just drop it and just not see it through. And you think, was I imagining things? Was Miz really hired? Was Miz really going to give Neville advice on on changing his image and becoming a bigger star? Or did I just dream that? Not that this is a new thing. They've been doing this. I mean, remember the very famous storyline where Eric Bischoff kissed Stephanie McMahon? Do you remember that one?
I do. And that was around the time we got some HLA.
yeah.
Well, I think when everyone thinks of hot lesbian action, they think of Rikishi. So, of course, what else? What other route would you go down? But no, do you think that WWE has got have the shows or the storylines? Do you think, just say for example, in the last 12 months, are they better? Are they worse? Are they the same? Where would you say the sort of level of enjoyment of just watching the product is?
I mean, that's a tough one to answer, because I mean, I really felt like Raw this week, the first 2/3 of it anyway, felt like the show had a lot of energy. Felt like it was really going somewhere, and it did. There was a little bit of the typical 3rd-hour slump, but I felt they really clawed it back with the Enzo and Cass angle at the end, which gave us a reason to stay with it until the end. So there's been a lot of episodes where you watch them and you thought, wow, that was like 3 hours. What did they achieve? Mm-hmm. And I feel like if you have that reaction to a 3-hour show, and the 3-hour show hasn't really taken anything anywhere, then that's an incentive to not watch next week. I think it's a tough question to answer, Kenny, whether it's better or worse than it was. Probably maybe it's not as good, because we had the brand split. That was last summer, and there was quite a lot of excitement attached to that. And then WWE was under quite a lot of pressure to really produce different things and to try and make it work, because most people thought it wouldn't. So, I mean, maybe they're sort of coasting a bit now. Maybe they've taken the foot off the accelerator pedal. I think they certainly have on many episodes, probably in April and May. But I do feel like they've got some momentum now going into Great Balls of Fire and into Battleground, which takes place July 23rd. Great Balls of Fire, of course, is July 9th, and Battleground is July 23rd. I feel like there is... It feels like the shows have got more oomph, more welly than they had in, say, April and May during the traditional post-WrestleMania slump.
And obviously, on SmackDown, there was the continuation of Jinder Mahal and Randy Orton, and there are rumours abound that at Battleground we might see the return of the Punjabi Present. was that you crying? What do you think of the return of that structure?
I will say that Randy Orton seemed energized on this week's SmackDown. He really did look miffed. He looked angry. He looked like he really wanted to beat Jinder down. I mean, this was the first time since this feud started where I've believed that Randy Orton actually believes in what he's doing. So I'm taking that as a giant plus. As far as the Punjabi Prison, they're going to have to do something, Kenny, to sex this feud up. You know what I mean? They're going to have to give it a lift, because
you know what you need. You know what you need if you want to sex this up with the Punjabi Prison. Then you make a phone call to one of Jinder Mahal's family members, the Great Khali. Let's get him back. I mean, can you imagine the pop? If he stumbles out to try and get involved.
Well, I mean, maybe Great Khali could be the distraction to allow Jinder to win again. Maybe
it wouldn't surprise me. Maybe Khali just throws one of the Singh brothers over the prison.
Yeah,
just like a sling ball.
Yeah. I mean, I really felt Jinder on this week's SmackDown, Kenny. I felt he came across as a lesser star than Luke Harper. So,
which is saying something, given that Luke Harper's not been on television for a month.
Yeah, I mean, I know the match is sort of designed for the babyface to get the pops with the comebacks and stuff. I understand all that, but it just felt like Luke Harper was the bigger star of the two. And I'm probably not alone in that judgment.
Do you know who I thought came across really well on this week's SmackDown?
Who was that?
Chad Gable. With his match with Kevin Owens. I thought that he came across really well, and it was a short match. It could have just been nothing, but I thought that he got enough offense in and looked good enough that it was a nice return for him. And seeing him sort of fling the US champion about a bit was a nice image, I thought.
Yeah, definitely. And Kevin Owens, he's a real pro. He was really selling after the match and made it look like it had been a really tough battle for him, even though, as you said, the match was very short. Great to see American Alpha on there. I mean, I read an interview with Daniel Bryan, I think it was earlier today, where he said that he felt that SmackDown needed to change and the format needed to change. And he actually singled American Alpha out as an act that they'd failed and that they really needed to push more and to really give them the vignettes and the personality profiles. Like what I was saying before with Enzo and Cass, they could have really done a video there with those two together to really push their friendship, so that when they split, it would have been even more heart-wrenching. So Daniel Bryan was saying we need to do more of that sort of thing with American Alpha to make people care about them more. I mean, I'm a huge fan of American Alpha. I thought they were fabulous in NXT, and I think it's really sad that WWE has not done more with them. Hopefully, Chad Gable will have turned a few heads with that performance this week, which I also enjoyed. And American Alpha will be given a chance to really shine. I mean, we know they can. This team can be so good, and it'd be great to see them, do the babyface thing well, and then once they've got some babyface, they've got the babyface support, then do the big heel turn, because they're so sort of naturally arrogant. I think they're better in the heel role. Maybe that will happen after the Usos have had their run.
Yeah, I think that the American, it's good to see them back, and I think that they've got a lot of potential. And yeah, I mean, the thing that's funny is when I was watching this week's SmackDown, I felt like when I was watching it, I wanted to see more of SmackDown, which is interesting because when you watch Raw, you're kind of by the end, you're like, I've had enough. I'm good.
Yeah.
I've watched enough. Whereas with SmackDown, it's because you watch the show and this week's show I thought was really well paced and was really good, but that didn't have the Fashion Police on it. Rusev's not back yet. Didn't have Ty Dillinger. There was no Sami Zayn match. So I think SmackDown's kind of good in the sense that not everybody's on it every week. And even with Raw, like last week's Raw didn't have Finn Balor or Roman Reigns on it. So there's a lot of, I think it's good in that regard.
Definitely. I mean, 2 hours is the optimum time for a wrestling show. But of course, Raw isn't going to be trimmed from 3 hours to 2 hours because TV rights fees are WWE's #1 revenue stream. So it's just not going to go back to 2 hours until the USA Network says so.
Well, that's my hope that for the 2019 renewal, that somehow it goes back to 2 hours. I don't think it will, but I'm hoping. I'm hoping that...
Yeah, I mean, it'd definitely be a better show.
I think if Raw went back to 2 hours, it would become a far better show. Far better.
Definitely. Absolutely. But, I mean, WWE's not going to turn down that money. It's just not going to. And if the option is there between keeping it as 2 or 3 hours, it's going to be 3 hours because of the money.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Chris McIntyre last week had asked us about our favourite wrestler and moment of all time. Last week we talked about wrestlers. This week it's moments. So what moments come to mind to you as your favourites in wrestling?
I've written about this many times, and I just thought it was the best angle ever. And that was Steve Austin, Mike Tyson, the night after Royal Rumble 1998. Absolutely fabulous. To me, the turning point in the Monday Night War. We had Austin come out. Austin's just won the Royal Rumble. We've got, Vince McMahon's there. We've got Mike Tyson there. Anyway, Vince McMahon's just about to announce what Mike Tyson's role will be in WrestleMania 14. Just before he could, the glass breaks. Austin comes out. Everyone looks really nervous. And the whole tease there with Austin. I mean, Austin was just so good in this segment. I mean, I'm sure you remember this segment, Kenny. I mean, you must have seen this many times. I know I've watched it loads of times.
Do you know, it's fun. I remember watching it on the Friday night. And at this point, like, you couldn't read the internet to see what happened, so you didn't know. And I remember they were advertising all night. There's an appearance from Mike Tyson. And also we're going to be joined by Stone Cold Steve Austin. And I remember looking at the clock going, it's like 7 minutes to midnight. There's not enough time for 2 segments. In my head, I'm going, so is Steve Austin going to be next week? And for whatever reason, I think because I was young, I just didn't put it together. And then it kind of clicked. It was like, is Steve Austin going to interrupt Mike Tyson? And when he did, it was just... And I think it was so realistic. And, with Vince screaming, "You ruined it, damn it," and all that kind of stuff. It was so perfect. And I think that it was just the right time and... maybe the best celebrity involvement in wrestling history in terms of effectiveness. Because
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, if you were a fan who was young like me, I was 12, I think, when that was on. You didn't know what was going on. Were you going to see Steve Austin versus Mike Tyson? Was he going to wrestle? You had no idea where it was going to go. And I think that was part of what made it so special.
Definitely. I mean, it was electric. I mean, it was one of those segments, like I was talking about earlier, where you had to tune in the next week. You had to see where this was going to go. You could not miss the show. And it was just an amazing segment that just ticked so many boxes. I mean, we had like Austin's there cutting that outstanding promo, just a tour de force. It was just incredible on Tyson, and Tyson's there. And Tyson really does he really know what's going on? Obviously, they're doing the rehearsal and everything; it'd all been set up. But his reactions were so perfect as well. And Vince was this was one of Vince's finest ever performances. Shane was great. Gerald Briscoe was there. All the officials, the referees. Just this real state of panic that everyone was in when Austin came out, as if, what's he doing? He wasn't supposed to interrupt this segment. And then we have the massive pull apart after, Austin gives Tyson the double finger, the sign language. Tyson shoves him, massive pull apart, chaos. Oh, it was just amazing. Just set up. It set up WrestleMania. It set up Vince versus Austin the night after which really began proper the night after WrestleMania 14. It just ticked so many boxes, covered so many bases, just fabulous. If you haven't seen it, you need to see it. If you have seen it, watch it again.
What a sell! And also, if you're going to watch it, it's also worth watching the Royal Rumble the night before, where Mike Tyson predicts that Cold Stone is going to win the Royal Rumble.
Yeah, and hilariously as well, I think in the segment he asked Tyson who his favourite wrestler was, and I think he said Bruno Sammartino, who at that point was at odds with WWF, and that was really funny as well.
I thought about this, and I find it very difficult, Chris, to talk about what my favourite moment is. It's just I'm terrible at these things, because it's like if you ask me what my favourite film is, I could tell you today it's Terminator 2, next week it could be Batman, the following week it could be Anchorman, it could be Ghostbusters. It always depends on my mood. But in terms of, and maybe it's because we're watching these Raws 20 years ago, which we should get you on for one of them, Finn. We should get you on one of those old Raw reviews that we do from 20 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm up for that.
But I think that in terms of a moment, and we're about to cover it on Patreon, is the main event of Canadian Stampede in 1997, because I think that it's one of the most clever storylines the WWF has ever done, where they had the Hart Foundation as baby faces in Canada, in Europe, and in all these places, the UK, but in America they were heels, and 5 of America's top baby faces, Legion of Doom, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Goldust and Shamrock, who were kind of getting the rub off the other 3, go to Calgary and go to Canada and fight the Hart Foundation, and Steve Austin, who's one of the hottest stars in wrestling, gets booed out the building in Canada. And I think the best bit is when the Hart Foundation are all coming out and they're all standing on the ramp, and then Bret's music hits, and if you watch it, you can literally see the hard cam shake because of that crowd. And I think just in terms of that Bret Hart storyline from 1997 is probably my favourite of any performer. And I think that night and that moment of the Hart Foundation, and immediately, obviously what happens with a lot of the Hart family going forward, it makes it an even better moment. And I think if you've never seen that main event, if because a lot of people kind of go, oh, Bret Hart, he's a good wrestler, but like, I don't really get it. Go and watch that match and just that night, because that night Bret Hart was the biggest star in wrestling, and I think it still stands to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to also give props as well to Austin for his heel performance in that match. You just look at how hard he was working to get people to boo him. And he was the number one babyface in the States. And he was in that, but he wasn't at that position yet where he was in January of 98 for the Royal Rumble angle, where he knew it was about to happen for him. That was still 6 months off. And you just look at how hard he was working to play heel in that match to complement the babyfaces on the night who were otherwise the heels. I mean, it was an amazing performance by Austin. I mean, I'm not saying he carried the match, but he definitely carried the match for his team and really gave those babyfaces so much to work with on the night. And you're right, absolutely terrific match. And it was so novel as well. I mean, we've had like the last sort of 12 years of Cena getting booed and Roman Reigns getting booed for the last 2.5 years. So it doesn't, it seems normal now for acts who should be cheered to be booed. But back then it was a rarity. I mean, we'd seen Shawn Michaels get booed against Psycho Sid at Survivor Series 1986 from Madison Square Garden. But that was like a shocking turn of events as well. So to see this event, the Canadian Stampede event, which would have been July of 97, wouldn't it?
Yeah, July. Yeah, early July. I think it was July 6th or something like that. It was very early in the month. That
sounds right. To see that reaction on pay-per-view, I mean, it was, people were like, wow, it was like people's heads were like exploding, what's going on here? So yeah, it was an amazing thing to witness. And actually that pay-per-view could have been one of the best pay-per-views WWF had ever promoted at that time. And I think there was only like 4 or possibly 5 matches on it, because they were only 2-hour events at that point. And like every match on the show was really good.
Yeah, it still stands to this day. And the funny thing was the original team that were going to face the Hart Foundation was Steve Austin, Shawn Michaels, Psycho Sid, and LOD. And I can only imagine if Michaels and Sid had been there instead of Goldust and Shamrock, how even more nuclear the boos would have been for Shawn Michaels in that building, and Sid would have probably been, nuts as well. So, but yeah, one of my favourites. So,
good choice. Very good choice.
As we kind of wind down here and finish off, just a couple of quick-fire questions from some of our listeners. This one's for you. I'm going to put you on the spot. Dre Warner wants to know, what's your favourite wrestling finisher of all time?
I don't know. Probably the Stone Cold Stunner, just because of the reaction it provoked. When Austin was at his peak. I went to see WrestleMania 15 in '99. Actually, dreadful WrestleMania. But
didn't you also go to
that one?
You also went to that really horrendous WrestleMania Rage Party.
Oh yeah, I was there for that as well. Oh, WrestleMania 15. It was just like. It was just dire, really, just a really poor show, saved only by, wasn't really saved. Austin versus Rock was a good main event. And had it not been for that, who knows what would have happened in the Monday Night War. But, it was quite something to witness WWF live at that point. Because in a sense, I wouldn't say they could do no wrong, because they could, but Austin was so over that so long as he delivered, then people went home happy. So to see him perform that move live and the reaction it provoked from the audience was something else. We went to Raw the next night, the night after WrestleMania, and there was fights breaking out everywhere, Kenny. It was like being in the ECW arena. It was like, there was a real tense atmosphere there. This is WWF. And there was just fights everywhere. And the audience was comprised heavily of sort of 17 to probably 30-year-old males. And so many of them were drunk. And, this isn't really a glowing endorsement of the period in a sense. But what an atmosphere for Austin. And he could do no wrong. So, I guess really the Stunner, having seen it live at that point. But there's so many great finishers. And it's like you were just saying there about what's your favourite film, or, what's your favourite album, or what's your favourite restaurant, or whatever. It changes. What's your favourite finisher, Kenny?
I'm going to cheat and give you one submission-based one and one pinfall-based one.
Okay.
My pinfall-based one is the Tombstone. I think it's just a great move. And then submission-based one is got to be the Sharpshooter. Because I feel like when the Sharpshooter was put on, it looked like there was no way to execute that without it being painful. Which I think was one of the great things about it. And that was one of we just on the old retro pay-per-views watched Cold Day in Hell, which would
that was Undertaker versus Austin main event.
Yeah, and that was the last time that you got to see Steve Austin take a tombstone. Because obviously that was one of the things, even as a kid, that kind of took me out of some of Austin's later matches with Undertaker, because you knew that Austin could not take a tombstone.
Yeah.
So, Tombstone and Sharpshooter would be my picks. I'm going to give you one last question, Finn, before we ride off into the podcast sunset. Mikey Gormley wants to know, is there anyone that you see right now being the next huge draw in WWE? For him, it's Finn Balor, if he's booked right. But is there someone in WWE right now who you think they could really, strap a rocket to and would do really well?
Yeah, this is one of those. This is something that we all want to happen. This is something that we've been yearning for years. All of us as fans or people who cover the business, and it's a really tricky one to answer, because sometimes you'll think, oh, this guy's got it, and then they just screw it up. And other times you think, well, that guy, there's no way he's got it. There's no way he's going to be that guy, and they decide to push him. I'm not really sure. Nakamura is doing quite well, but I'm not sure if he's going to be that guy who could be another Cena-level star or Austin-level star, or, what's another example? would you say like a Triple H level star? I mean, he was huge, of course, in 2000, and, you know, big deal for many years afterwards, and still a big deal now as a part-timer. I don't really know the answer to that question because, and I'm not being awkward here. I'm not holding out on you. But the problem is, there's so many factors. It's almost like the thing you always hear about people who submit ideas to, you know, on the writing team in WWE. They've got to go through so many processes that by the time they're actually executed, they're so watered down and filtered that all the goodness is gone. You know, so it's the same with a wrestler who has, you know, open close quote, can't miss potential. There are all these factors that would actually, in a sense, conspire to prevent him from fulfilling or realizing his potential. I mean, the Daniel Bryan thing in 2013 was just amazing how the TV existed to tell us that he wasn't this guy that we thought he was. And finally, WWE relented and said, let's give the fans what they want. And WrestleMania 30 in 2014 was just one of the great WrestleMania stories ever. Obviously, such a shame for Bryan that, you know, he ended up suffering the injuries and retiring. But you go back and look at that and think, well, would Daniel Bryan have been the guy to become the man who won 2 matches at WrestleMania and ended the show as champion? That was very hard to predict. Who do you think, Kenny? Is there anyone you see in the system that could be that guy?
I think Nakamura is the best chance. Just based on reaction alone, he always seems to get it. I think that he is kind of wacky enough that, because the key thing is Vince has to get them. Yeah. Vince has to, and I think that Nakamura's probably one of the only people who is completely outside of Vince's comfort zone that I think could win him round. And I interviewed him at WrestleMania weekend, and the guy's just got such a swagger, and he's so cool. This was like 7 a.m. and he's standing there with a coffee, and he looks cooler than anyone I've ever met in my life. You know, and that's 7 a.m. doing media. So I think Nakamura's probably the best option. I think that I think that's probably the best option.
Yeah, it's really tough because they've got so many people in developmental, just like so many, and they've really got so many talent who can actually put a really good match together. When you think about it, WWE doesn't have that much talent that can't put something respectable together in the ring. And it was not always like that, you know. It certainly wasn't like that in the late 80s when I started watching, or throughout the 90s. And you look at the talent that these people have, and you think, well, why can't they? And this is the thing that's always got me about pro wrestling, is that the bookers decide who wins and who loses. They decide how they win and lose, how quickly they win and lose, which moves they use to win or lose. Everything is orchestrated. Everything is managed. And it always sort of strikes me as strange that they can't create big stars in a completely prearranged environment. And it should be, I'm not saying simple, but it should be easier than it is. I think it should be.
I think you're right.
You know, because it's not like in a real sport where you've got the wrong person who's unmarketable winning, like, oh, how are we going to push him? Obviously, that's how pro wrestling became a work 100 years ago, when they're like, right, this guy here, people really like him, they're buying tickets to see him, let's put him over. Let's make this guy our champion. So, I mean, you can understand why it all became a work, because at the end of the day, it's all about getting people through the door, or in this today's world. Back then, of course, everything was just all box office, but now there's so many different factors. But still, it's a talent-driven business, and it needs talent in order to become bigger than it is. I mean, I really want to see people. My whole thing with pro wrestling is I want it to be bigger, better, badder, more interesting, more exciting. I mean, I'd love there to be another boom, so that people who aren't fans now are like, oh, this wrestling's amazing, I've got to watch it. I'd love us to be in that position again. And theoretically, you only need a couple of big stars to really cause that eruption and really bring those non-fans in. But creating them's, easier said than done, as we can see.
As we can see. Well, listen, just the very last thing. Something came in my email inbox last night that I thought was quite funny. And I'm just going to very quickly tell you what it is, and I'm going to then ask you quickly, Finn, if you've had any similar experiences that come to mind. When you do wrestling media, you get sent emails from companies about media opportunities with wrestlers. And we got an email from Impact Wrestling saying that Scott Steiner is available for one-on-one media interviews to discuss Slammiversary. So I thought I'd just tell you the top... Now, in the email, you're told the topics that he will discuss with you.
Right.
And these are the only topics that he will discuss.
Right.
So he'll discuss Slammiversary, he'll discuss Impact, he'll discuss the Impact World title picture, he will discuss his long-time hatred for Jeremy Borash, he will discuss the University of Michigan, he will discuss his freaks around the world, and he will discuss crazy YouTube videos. That's the pitch of if you want to interview Scott Steiner for Slammiversary. Now, I'm sure that they're taking a little bit of creative license with that, but I just wonder, have you had any mental requests like that where you interview someone and they're like, you can't talk about, you can only talk about this, this, and this, you can't talk about anything else? And has that ever stopped you from interviewing anybody?
Not really. I mean, I did have a situation with one wrestler, Hardcore Holly, where they wanted to see the interview before I published it. And I was like, no, that's not going to happen. No one's going to have editorial control over what I will and won't publish. So I turned the interview down. I did an interview with Mick Foley in '98, about 4 weeks after the Hell in a Cell match at King of the Ring 1998. Wrote about this in depth in the Power Slam Interviews Volume 2. And I actually went through the office to get that. It was the first time that had ever happened. And they wanted to see a list of questions that I was going to ask Mick Foley. I had to fax it. Remember fax machines, Kenny?
I never got to use one, but I do remember them.
Yeah, I had to fax the questions over. And then I rang back a little bit later and they went through the questions and they raised no objections to any of the questions that I was going to ask. And I didn't have to send them the completed interview for their approval before I published it. So I think that's probably the only 2 times really that I've ever had to deal with something like that. I mean, I know after the Benoit tragedy and Signature Pharmacy, whenever any of those guys were doing interviews who were caught up in the Signature Pharmacy mess, the people interviewing weren't allowed to ask about that. So I know this for WWE, this was quite normal. There would be lots of topics that were off limits. I'm sure anyone who's had any experience of interviewing WWE people will have many stories to tell about what they could and couldn't ask. But to me, when I was doing interviews with people, Kenny, I always really wanted to be, if I wasn't allowed to really ask the questions and really give people an interview that was as good as it could have been, unless the guy was like a huge star, I would decline it. I mean, really, when I interviewed Hulk Hogan back in '94, there was no restrictions there at all. I could have asked him anything. So, yeah, very, very few restrictions throughout my interviewing career. And I've interviewed a lot of people over the years. Well, I remember. I mean, to me, that's the way it should be as an interviewer. But I certainly understand why these restrictions are imposed as well. Mm-hmm. Because if it's an official interview set up by the office, then it's designed to serve a purpose. So I absolutely get that. But most of the interviews I did were ones that either I set up myself or a photographer would act as the middleman. They were ones that I set up without office involvement. So maybe that's the difference here. Maybe that's why I was given so few restrictions over the years.
Maybe. I remember a couple of years ago I interviewed Matt Hardy for the first time, before he'd become broken, before I sort of started working with him. I remember the person that set the interview up had said, listen, it's very important that you don't bring up any of his drug issues. I said, well, I don't really have any interest in bringing that up anyway. But that was one of the conditions. It was like, please don't bring that up. And I was like, I mean, I don't really get why I would bring it up, but it was fine. So I think as long as it's something, for me anyway, as long as it's something that it's not really going to affect the way I want to do an interview, then it doesn't really bother me. But if it's something where you can't bring up, like, you can't talk about WWE, then with a WWE guy, then it's a problem. I remember one of my friends went to Robert, actually, who is our sort of semi co-host here on Inside the Ropes now, but he went to one of Fozzie's first ever live gigs in Glasgow, and they were doing these like sort of really kind of shoddy meet and greet things because they hadn't really set it up properly yet, and they didn't. So it was basically you were supposed to be able to have dinner with the band. That was the idea. So like they just get a big bucket of fried chicken and like paper plates, and then everybody obviously wants to sit and talk to Jericho. Nobody wants to talk to the band. So the band are all in the corner just eating chicken away from everyone, and Jericho's sitting eating chicken with like 10 fans, including my friend, and nobody said anything yet, and they've just tucked into their food. And this is 2008, I think it was, and they're sitting just eating away, and this one guy out of the blue, first thing that anyone said, just said, "So that Benoit thing, huh?"
Oh.
You can imagine how that room would have responded to anyway, interviews are strange. I will not be going ahead to interview Scott Steiner. I spent 4 nights with him on a stage, and he is a lovely man. But I think I will look forward to what the wrestling media get from him. It'll be. But I do have one last question for you, Finn, because someone who you're very familiar with also sent us in a question. Mo, that used to work for your magazine.
Right.
And he asks, and I think I know your answer on this, but he says, does Finn fancy a Power Slam reunion tour around the UK to talk the Power Slam years and wrestling from that and current eras?
I've never really thought about that.
He did put a winky face at the end.
I think the best thing I can do with that, I mean, it's a very interesting question. And I think probably, Kenny, you and I need to talk money. Are you the one who's going to promote it?
Am I getting involved now? God, okay.
I mean, let me have a think about that one. Let me have a think about that one, and because you've never been seen on camera, you've never been seen in public. You could be a woman, but just with a much, a very masculine voice. We don't know. What do you mean? I finally put my picture on my website, finleymartin.co.uk. My picture is on there.
How do we know
And it's
that's
not
you?
an old photo. It's only a few years old. No, it's not 10 years old. I still look sort of like that.
We don't know what you look like. Because I remember, I think I saw you. I think I found you on Twitter a couple of years ago or something, and it was like you from behind, looking at something. So you're like GTV. You're anonymous.
Yeah, it was always nice to be anonymous, and I think for people who were buying superstars for wrestling in the very early days, I mean, my picture appeared in that a few times, and I just got that out of my system. I think I was in Power Slam, modeling the Power Slam T-shirts when that came up with one of my brainwaves for something slightly different. I was doing the Power Slam merch, and I was never really happy with the T-shirts, to be honest with you. So I was in the picture there, but not actually formally identified. So it's not to me, Kenny, the wrestlers, the performers, they're the stars, and really we aren't. So up until the launch of the website a few weeks ago, I didn't really feel the need to put my picture out there. I'm not knocking anyone who does. But to me, it's like, I'm a voice, or I'm the words on a screen or on a page. That's my purpose. That's my role in pro wrestling, to provide a voice or the words. So I don't really think it's that important that my picture is out there, or people really know what I look like, even though now, of course, they do.
I think that's very commendable of you. I do want to remind everyone that next week at the Goldberg Tour, there will be Kenny McIntosh 8x10s on sale for £10. I will sign them for free. Out of the goodness of my heart, because that's how much I care about everybody.
That's it. You're only charging £10.
Well, it's only a tenner. That's only £5 less than a Goldberg autograph. You know, it's a bargain. I'm kidding. Anyway.
No, but that was a very interesting idea that Mo Chatra came up with. Let me have a think about that, and I'll comment next week.
Okay. Where can people find your ebooks, your blogs, your finally your face picture, all the stuff they want to hear about you? Direct them to that.
Yes, my website, which is finleymartin.co.uk, or they can follow me on Twitter at @FinleyMartin or @PowerSlamOnline. Please keep those questions coming in. Where can people find you, Kenny?
You can find me at KennyMC1985, or you can follow the brand at inside_the ropes. You can still get some last minute tickets as well for Goldberg coming to the UK next week, Monday in Glasgow, Tuesday in Manchester, and the Sunday, July 2nd in London. When we talk next week, 2 of the 3 shows will be done, so we'll hopefully have some Goldberg tales, trying to convince Finn to come along to one of the shows, so we'll see if that's successful.
Well, I'm thinking I may well be at the Manchester show.
We might even take a selfie. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the pop on the internet?
Just the number of likes on Twitter. I mean, you know, it's obviously very important, the number of likes we get.
Well, you know, that's how you make money now, by having followers and likes.
Of course it is.
That's WWE's new model. Anyway, thanks for listening, everyone. I hope you have a great weekend, and thanks for your support as always. We'll be back next week with more, and we'll see you down the road.
If I bleed tonight, if I am sad tonight,